All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome. This is workshop. And first, just want you to know that we are streaming. So we have cameras and microphones. So only say things that you would, you won't broadcast. The first thing. And Bob Jeager is going to basically, we're just going to have a conversation, ask questions, talk about things from his presentation earlier today, which that presentation was recorded and will be made available along with his slides so on Feed Loop, they'll be quicker, and then we'll make it available on our YouTube channel also. I just love talking to to Bob. We've had several conversations already that I was fascinated by, and appreciate the dedication and work and the spirit that he brings to this. And we heard earlier about the vital work of reimagining our sacred spaces as community assets. And now he's going to invite us to conversation about moving this along, however that vision to practice where we are in that level and see how it goes. So.
Thank you so much. Well, welcome everybody. I got the chance to talk to some of you individually, but not everybody here. So this session is meant to be much more informal and much less structured and more open for conversation. Because we touched on so many things earlier, reimagining space, talking to neighbors, engaging the community, raising money in new ways. We didn't talk as much about that. How do you tell the story of an older building? Telling the story, I think, was one of the themes we were talking about. But I often say, I think congregations need to manage their buildings differently, fund them differently, share them differently, and open them up and engage the community differently. And we touch on all those things. And that's what we do all the time. And there are a lot of great examples of all this, and we have a lot of practical resources. Maybe that's one thing I should start with. I touched on a few of the programs that we offer. I mentioned New Dollars, New Partners, which is one way to build the capacity of a group of congregations. So if you, in your neck of the woods, I know some of you from various states around here, so if there's a group of UCC or disciples or Methodist congregations want together to go down this path of how do we tell our story better? How do we get our neighbors interested? How do we rethink our space? How do we raise money in new ways? New Dollars, New Partners, which is a year-long, multi-day training experience, is one thing to consider. We've done that with many, many, many judicatories around the country. And we can do that with 6 churches or 10. And it's a great learning experience together. I mentioned Halo. Halo can be done for groups of churches or individual. So if you're thinking, my congregation does a lot to share space and to serve the community, we'd love to measure our economic impact. So we can talk about that and how that's done. We do a lot of community-wide capital campaigns. We really believe in that. So we're really lucky. About a third of our income, partners, is through consulting. And the single biggest consulting piece is community-wide capital campaigns. So most of the people you might work with for raising money are for-profit. We're a nonprofit, and we have a very particular point of view. As you've heard, we really believe congregations need to reach out beyond their members, which is a welcome thing because we need help from beyond our members. So we can talk about that. As I said, our experience, we just did another survey we reached out to a couple of dozen churches that have done community-wide campaigns, meaning they really went out there. They talked to foundations. They talked to people from outside their congregation. And what we learned is about 2/3 of the money they raised came from outside. That's a pretty amazing stat for, because who have we depended on all these years? Our own members, right? We've always done it that way. So it's a lot more work. It takes a greater effort. Often you might need to work with an outside consultant to help you do it all. But it can really pay off in a big way. So we could talk about that. So I'm here just to encourage a conversation and answer your questions. So who wants to be the brave person to ask the first question?
I will.
Please.
So I'm from Austin. I
Great.
serve as the associate pastor at Central Christian Church in downtown. We have a historic building built in 1929 and all the things that come with that. We are in need of some major things to be repaired. Our AC system needs about a $350,000 improvement. And we also have an elevator for accessibility, which was donated about 25 years ago.
Sounds
So
like
now
an
the parts are no longer even available, not even on eBay. Because we have bought parts on eBay to have installed.
I was gonna say, you got pretty desperate if you wanted to eat.
Yeah. And it worked. It bought us some time, but now it's a freight elevator and can't be relied on to put people in it.
Right.
Although all our staff has been trained on how to extract people from the elevator. Things they don't teach you in seminary, but you know, we have always had we have a parking lot that generates a nice income because we are downtown.
Right.
So that's always a nice buffer to our general budget, in the tune of about $120,000 a year.
That's a lot of money.
And it's guaranteed income operated by a third party, so we don't have to do the UBIT, UBIT tax and all that stuff. And we now we've been really fortunate to have, tenants throughout the years on our second, third floor education Sunday school classrooms. And we just partnered with another organization. It's Local Artisan Group. They have almost 20 artisans in our building in the different classrooms. But with that comes opportunities with renters, right? So, and because we don't have an air conditioning system that's always 100%, and we don't have an elevator that makes it accessible for them and their clients. So we've started looking at outside money, and we did look at sacred spaces, I'm sorry. So when things say matching funds, can that be your existing holding funds, like things we have in endowment that are maybe earmarked, or does it truly have to always be new money?
Well, first of all, you do sound like a good fit for the National Fund, so I'm glad you're thinking about it. And are you thinking about it maybe for this year or a year from now?
Well, we looked at it last year and we were overwhelmed.
Yeah.
So perhaps when we get back home, we can wrangle some people to help us do that.
By the way, if you do pursue it and you're working on a draft, let me know. I'm happy to give you feedback if you decide to pursue it. But to go back to your question, we do require new money, and I'll tell you why. And just a little background, we talked about the National Fund a little bit. Now we've served, I think, like 130 congregations. So we've been doing it about a decade. And we've learned in every single case, our grant, because the National Fund is a fairly prestigious source of funding and it's pretty unique. And so it always serves as a catalyst for new giving, both from members and non-members. It always works that way. And that's what we want. We want to encourage the churches in the fund to go out in new ways, like we've been saying earlier today, and talk to new, and maybe some of your existing members will say, I'm going to give you more because I love what's happened here, but also to go to new sources. So yeah, so what we require is that it has to be money requested and received after a church enters the fund. So let me explain what that means. So we now are in the middle of the application season through the end of February. And again, fundforsacredplaces.org is the site. So take a look. We say a lot about what we're looking for. And then we receive them all by the end of February, early March, and then we spend a couple of months, we have hundreds to sort through and make sense of them all. And we have a staff of like 8 people just for the National Fund now. It's gotten so big. And then we sort through hundreds, maybe 350, 450, 500 of them. And we narrow it down to maybe 40 to 50. And then we invite those to give us a little more information. We might want to know exactly where you stand with your planning. If you've got drawings from your architect, we'd like to see those. And then we bring those to our advisors in September. And that's when the decisions are made. So that's the moment at which funds can be raised to make the match after that moment. So say it's September 15th, anytime after that. So we don't count existing funds. We don't count grants that were received before, and we really don't want to even count grants that were requested before, because that's earlier stuff. We really want to encourage some new money. So that may sound daunting, but by the way, part of our job is to help you. So we haven't talked about this yet, but in addition to the capital grant, which can be up to $500,000, we provide $20,000 for planning. And that can include helping a congregation do a community-wide campaign. We're not going to run the campaign, but we can advise you and help you as you think about that campaign. So you can choose, you have several choices. You can do a HALO study. We talked about HALO. So this is free. This is all part of the fund. You can do a HALO study. You can ask for help on a community-wide campaign. You can ask for some help on your communications and marketing, because you want to tell your story in a bigger way, right? You want to get more funding. So you have several choices on, you might even want to get some help on talking to your neighbors. You already have a building that's well used, but a different church may want some help to engage the community and think about the space. So you have all these different choices. So it's not like you're doing it alone, and we give you 2 to 3 years to raise the match. So it's not required right away. I mean, you have time to raise that $500,000 or whatever the amount is. And it's actually better than it was. In the old days, the top grant was $250, and it had to be, and the match had to be 2 to 1. So if you received $250 from the fund, you had to raise another $500,000. But now it's just 1 to 1.
Nice.
Because we've wanted to make it less daunting. Yeah. So does that sound reasonable?
No, I appreciate that explanation.
Yeah.
Because we were overwhelmed looking at it, and we were just like, we don't have that. We don't have the energy at that moment to put into that.
Right. Yeah. Well, of course, we know the application. I know it pretty well. I don't do it. I mean, we have a staff that does hands-on, but I know it fairly well. So just for you who've not looked at it yet, it's not that onerous. However, we do ask for things like, we want to know, have you done some planning with an architect yet? It doesn't have to be finished, but you're going to have to know something, because you have to know, well, we are facing, $1 million in repairs, or we're facing $250,000 in repairs. That's why we're asking you for a grant of $125 or a grant of $500, whatever it is. But you may not have all your planning done, so we can help you finish that work. But so that's one thing you do have to have some information on. Same with your fundraising plans. We don't need a full plan, but hopefully your church will have a sense, well, if we have to raise another $500,000, we think we can get 200 from our members, and we have these 3 foundations in mind, and we have friends in the community, and in the disciples world, we have some thoughts on who would. So it doesn't have to be final, but knowing that you're getting organized and you have some notion. But we do ask things like, why are you important? That's the opening question, kind of. What's your case? We've been talking about your case, right? So that's kind of the opening question. Why are you important? Why are you special? Why should people care about you? And then we do ask about the architecture and about the health of the congregation, et cetera, et cetera. I think a good grant writer person, not that you need to hire one, but somebody who knows, could do it in a day. It's not that awful. But it does require some attachments and some, like if you've got a preliminary plan from an architect saying this is a new elevator we need, and et cetera, that may be one of your attachments.
So you say architect, but it could be general contractor.
Well, you may recall what I said earlier about architects. If you have a very narrowly defined project, like our building is in great shape, you need a new elevator.
Yeah, we just need the guts.
And there was one other thing you mentioned.
HVAC.
The HVAC, which we have bids for, all
Yeah.
those things.
But elevator is a kind of a narrow thing, but when you get into HVAC, that relates to other things. Where you put the systems, where you put the ductwork, it can affect humidity and temperature in your, it can affect some things. We prefer you have an architect at hand. They may not have to do a full plan
We can always retain one.
and have somebody just keep an eye on things. You're in a good place because you have a really good idea what you're doing. But for most churches, I recommend a building assessment, conditions assessment.
We did that with architect.
Okay, well, good.
I mean, it's been 10 years, but we did one. Building
After
hasn't
10 years, you
changed.
probably need a refresher.
Right.
So just a quick word on conditions assessment. A qualified architect who knows older buildings should be able to look from top to bottom. Roof, flashing, gutters, downspouts, walls, windows, doors, foundation, structural system, HVAC, plumbing, electrical, accessibility, stained glass perhaps. So we really, 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 really recommend, it's a very good use of your money, is to work with an architect on a conditions assessment. Because quite frankly, any major funder will want to see it, not just us. Any smart, sophisticated funder will want to see a recent plan. What does it cost? Well, it depends on the size and complexity of your building. It might cost $15,000, it might cost $30,000. I'll give you an example of a church that resisted. Since we have disciples, how many here are disciples folks? Okay. Anybody been to National City Church in DC?
Mm-hmm.
Well, they came into the National Fund. I think at that point our top grant was $250. So they asked for $250. And by the way, a grand building, as you know, if you've been there, it's an amazing place. And they did not want to hire an architect. They felt their contractor relationships are great, they had what they needed, and we kept saying, you have an enormous, I think there was mostly HVAC also. That was a big thing for them, maybe some roof work. And we said, with a building this complex and this big, you really want someone, not a contractor, but independent, like a doctor for your body, to look at everything. And they reluctantly, it was like pulling teeth. And this is I'm not putting down the leadership there. They just didn't have that experience, and they finally did it. And afterwards, they said to us, it's the best thing we ever did. Best thing they ever did. So if you have a smallish budget, you may be reluctant to spend the money. My recommendation would be talk to a couple of your donors that really will get this. And and if you know other things are going to be coming down the pike, like you need to replace the roof, you need to replace the elevator, so you're moving toward that. One of your smarter donors might say, I'll kick in $5,000 or $10,000 to help you do this stuff. I recommend it. And if you've had one 10 years old, you can go back to that firm and just ask them to take a fresh look. Yeah, we really believe in this. Really believe in this. This is really helpful to your congregation. And as I said, earlier, it's another relationship. A good architect will come to love you, and love your building, and will come to know you, and you can turn to them on an ongoing basis. It's another connection to the larger world, and you will come to trust them to be your guide. So that's my soapbox.
And just to verify one of the things that you mentioned about new money, grants is considered new money, but it's not ideal. Is that kind of
No, grants are fine. Just we wanted the grant proposal to be submitted to them after you come in the fund.
Gotcha.
But no, grants are fine. So we accept new bequests, grants, obviously gifts. It can be from a government source, it can be from Pi Foundation, it can be from a neighbor, it can be from a member, it can be, by the way, we haven't talked a lot about fundraising, but we talk a lot about it in our training. Can you guess what is the most lucrative, I hate to use the word lucrative, the most promising source of new funding outside your existing members? What's another source of funding outside your members that might be the most fruitful? Let's use the word fruitful, the most fruitful for your campaign.
People that live in the area.
Like neighbors, good guess, but that's not what I'm looking for. This is a test.
It have to do with fruit.
We all fail.
No, that's
That was a hint. No, okay, it's not a fruit.
Other churches?
It's your former members. The ones who've drifted away or moved away. And so I'm gonna pretend you're in one of our training courses, because we ask this question when we work with a group of churches. How many of you keep close tabs on former members?
Not close.
Yeah. See, this is what we get, 1 or 2 hands raised. Well, by the way, this is just good advice generally, not just for fundraising. Find a way to reconnect to those folks, because a lot of them still care about you. Whether they've moved to someplace like Florida, or they've just moved further out to the exurbs, or they just have drifted.
Yeah.
Many of them still care and may have means, because they may be older and they may have, they've got means. And now we also say, you're reconnecting with them, the first thing you do with them should not be a letter asking for money. Although we've heard churches talk about that. Oh yeah, we'll write them a letter asking. No. First of all, you should never raise money with a letter anyway. That's another topic. It should always be in person. But the thing to do is bring them back. Have a homecoming dinner, have a tour and a concert, have, event. So they're reconnected, and then, you have to rebuild the relationship, and then you can ask them for money, but not with a letter. But that could be very okay, I'll use the word fruitful again. It could be the most fruitful. Lucrative sounds very kind of for-profit, but it really can be great, an important contribution to your. Yes.
The people that grew up when the Sunday school wing was built and they were like 1,000 kids, they haven't been there in years, but they've got a lot of money and they're right now living somewhere else, and their greatest memory was at church, to your point.
Yep.
And
If you talk to them about.
well, we get money for that. Yeah, they are, I've never met them, but they still give us money for things.
Well, oh my God,
right?
and they say for any donor, what they're giving is just a hint of what they
Yeah.
could be giving. So if you reconnect and go, where are they now?
Oh, it's just people's, somebody's kids live somewhere else and they're retired now and they're.
Right, well then go.
They live in Arizona, but they.
Right, well, you may end up in Arizona having lots of
Yeah, right.
talking about this. And by the way, speaking of people who gave, again, we're getting into some of the nitty gritty of what our training is all about, but how many of you have stained glass? Okay, what's at the bottom of the stained glass?
Who donated it?
Exactly. Well, have you thought about those families? This is much like your question. And we know of a church, I think it's in Indiana, that looked up that family, found the descendants, and got a major gift. So all the people, and if you walk around a Protestant church, I think we're pretty much all Protestant here, right? Windows, memorial plaques, there may be a plaque on your baptismal font or on the pulpit, all around the building. You might have like 20 families mentioned. And some of them may still be very involved, but others you may have lost track of. And that's really worth it. Invite them to come back. Like if you're planning to restore some windows, invite them to come back. Do a tour, work with your historical society, do some research about the windows and see who made them. And, that's a great opportunity to tell that story. So, so we have a pie chart that we share in our training about, where the money comes from. And a third, as I say, is members. And then there's 20-some% are individuals that are not members, and there's 25% that are grants. And then you may raise money from events and then, government, et cetera, et cetera. By the way, events is a tiny sliver, but churches still do it. Why do we do it?
Can
Pardon?
Publicity.
Publicity, yeah, and maybe more friends raising than fundraising. But you're some of you are pastors, most of you are pastors, right? Events are exhausting. They're traditional, so nobody really wants to stop. But it's worth stepping back and saying, really, what is this doing for us? And if it's fundraising, that may be fine, and then maybe it's not the event itself. Maybe you follow up that event with a conversation with some of those folks you don't see so often and say, thank you so much for coming. We'd love to talk to you about our project. Would you consider helping us? So sometimes a church, when they take a fresh look at their event, they'll say, you know what, we shouldn't be doing this. But then you have to talk to the people who run it because they may love it or they may be relieved. Do you have any events led by people who might be somewhat relieved if it was done? I can see some nodding heads, right? So that may, anyway, we're not against events. It's just that when you look at the pie chart, it's a tiny sliver, of all the money that's raised. So anyway, so you can see money is a big part of, and we just want congregations to feel comfortable talking about money and thinking about new conversations with people that don't normally give. But you can't do that until you have your case. This is the fundamental thing, your story. And so when we do our training, that's the first thing we start with. Who you are, what you have, what you do, the three elements of the case, What's your history, identity, purpose, what does your building offer, what are problems and opportunities? And I'll tell you, again, you're getting a little hint of our training. I think the most important part of your case is what you do. Not who you are, not what you have. Those are both important, but what you do, because that touches on who you serve. And I think when you're talking to, especially non-members, a community foundation, donors in your community, Austin or wherever you are, it's what you do that matters most to them. They may appreciate your building, they may appreciate your history, but if you serve kids or the arts, you mentioned artisans, that's what will tend to get the most result. The biggest result is what you do. So when we do our training, we talk about these elements, the mantra, who we are, what we have, what we do as the elements of your case. And then we ask every congregation to begin to write a case. It's not a tome, it's like 3 pages, but it's meant to touch on all the reasons people should care about you. All the reasons. And it's not easy to write a case because it's also like an article in the paper. You start with the most important things. Why should people care? And you get to that and you're kind of telling a story. And it's not a history. It's very tempting to say, well, we were founded in
1829.
Yeah, and right, and then we built our first building in 1851, and then we built our second one in 18, and then we had a fire, and then our second pastor came, and whatever. Guess what? Who cares about that? Almost no one cares about that. Your members barely care about that. I'm exaggerating. But
And it's true.
But when we talk about writing a case, which is really, we have been here, we consider, I don't know how you guys would put it, but when churches start thinking that way, they can begin to articulate in a beautiful way what their reason for being, what the raison d'etre has been, what's their reason for being, and what have they provided the community, and where are they now? Your presence, your outreach, your building, who you serve, the life you brought to your community over the course of 100 years or whatever. And now we're moving toward investing in our building in a new way. It's a very powerful thing to do. It takes some work, and it's got to start powerfully. We often say it's like an article in the paper. You grab the reader's attention, and you're summing up what's going to be said. And at the end, you summed up what you just said. Remember journalism in high school? So it's kind of like journalism. The case has got to grab the attention of the reader. And even though we talk about all this in our training, on occasion, a church will submit its draft case statement, and it will start, we were founded in 1832, and we built our first building in 1849, that whole stuff. And I'm looking to think, what? Were you not listening? That's just not going to work, And you can use this. So when you've written a case, you can use this or pull from it. You don't really send the case statement anywhere. You use it as a source document for a grant proposal or a letter you may write, or maybe you're writing a press release or something else. This has got a lot of really good information. And then you can pull from that when you're in the course of communications and fundraising. Yes, back there.
A question about rural churches. What does a relatively stable rural church look like to you with regard to funding?
Well,
Good question.
rural churches often are, they're smaller, but they're often much more self-sufficient. We talked earlier about the work that's done. Sometimes people volunteer to do a lot of the work, but they still play a community role, even though it's not so densely populated, But they can do innovative work too. And I'll give you a good example of this. We've done a lot of work with Nordic churches. You may have thought, well, what are they? So in the upper Midwest, so Swedish, Norwegian, Danish, even Icelandic. Yes, there are Icelandic churches in North Dakota, but most of them are up north in Canada. So we were working with Vidalin, Icelandic, Lutheran, they're almost all Lutheran, of course. And it was Vidalin Church, literally in the middle of nowhere. Talk about rural. I mean, there was nothing anywhere nearby. This lovely wood church. The closest thing to it was an Air Force base. So they actually, one of their better relationships with people in the Air Force base, and they would have a Memorial Day service and invite the Air Force base leaders to come in. That was one of their important relationships. But they also had a cemetery with all these Icelandic names. And so what they did, so, it's not unlike urban, it's just on a different scale, and they had to be really creative. And it's a very elderly congregation, as you're probably not shocked to hear that. And so they went to the graveyard and they wrote down all the names on all the gravestones. And the nice thing about being older is you remember, right? And a lot of these Icelandic folks had moved to California and all over the country, but they found them, many of them, and they wrote them. Now, writing people is not the best way to raise money. Those of you who are pastors know you really should sit down with someone, but that was not practical. So they wrote letters to all these families and they raised $40,000. And for a rural church in northern North Dakota, that was a lot of money. So they share their space a little bit. I mean, it's a tiny place. It seats maybe, 50 people at most. It's tiny. It's almost like a chapel size. But they thought hard about how do we build a broader array of connections? How do we build on the relationship with the Air Force folks? And I remember I talked about that church in Indiana where we helped the church bring together some civic leaders to walk through the building and talk about things. Now, this church, there's not much to look at. It's the sanctuary and the narthex. That's it. There's nothing else. So what did we do? We wanted to model how to do this. So we said, invite just 6 or 7 people, because that's all that would fit in the narthex. And so we sat with those folks, and they talked about how the church might connect in new ways and invite people in new ways and lift their profile, have a sign. There was no sign. I mean, you could drive down the local road, you wouldn't even know it's there. So, how do they tell their story? How do they reach more folks? And they did it. And so, I think it's important to make, that's why we did the rural halo study, because rural small town churches often say, but how about us? We're different. And they are, you are different. But I do think the principles hold. The principles hold about connecting more broadly. It may look a little differently because you don't have immediate neighbors. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yes.
So when you got empty space
Yeah.
and, I'm under the impression that, you can share it with nonprofits, but not a for-profit.
That's not true.
It's not
You
true.
can, but there are tax implications if you share with a for-profit. And it depends on your municipality on how they will come down on you. So often they will assign a property tax only for that portion of the building that's rented to a for-profit. Say a law firm, I don't know why, but say a law firm uses you. So it would only, but in other municipalities, that will trigger property tax for the entire site. So you just need to talk to your local folks, your city or town. Are you in a bigger city, or I'm trying to remember where you are?
About 11,000.
So it's a kind of medium size. You might need to talk to a real estate lawyer. and to the town, see how they handle that. And, you know, maybe not where you are, but in some northeast cities where I live, some jurisdictions are hungry for money, and they will look for the simplest excuse to tax the church. And they also have a very narrow idea. It's astonishing to me. They have a very narrow idea of what's religious activity. Like worship and Christian and Sunday school, you know. But I think all of us would say, when you're serving the homeless, or you're serving the hungry, or you're serving kids, that's your mission. But some municipalities don't see it that way, which is crazy to me. And then you have to face, like, you're gonna have to go to court over it or to have a fight. So you don't want to have a fight. But most cities are not like that. So yeah, no, you can. I mean, someone mentioned earlier, I'm trying to remember who it was, sharing the kitchen for somebody who was building a bakery business.
Yeah.
Well, that person, I'm assuming, is for profit. You know, that woman who was building a business. Whether that triggered a property tax assessment for the kitchen, I don't know. And quite frankly, you know, a lot of municipalities probably wouldn't even notice and might not even care. You know, it probably depends on where you are. So yeah, I think, you know, you might want to consider that, just with your eyes open.
We hired a tax attorney to help us navigate that. We had a for-profit on our second floor, as long as we didn't provide services. So we didn't provide cleaning services, trash, all that kind of stuff. It helped us negate tax implications. So there's lots of, get someone that knows about church taxes.
Right.
Because they can really help you navigate, because the laws change every single year.
Yeah.
On what works and what doesn't.
And it's specific to states too, because when we were doing the Bedford House, we had to look at that because we're charging, you know, for rooms and stuff. There's UBIT taxes and laws and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, it's wise to get the legal.
Right.
It's worth the extra couple of $1,000s for somebody to save you. Like our tax attorney even went back 3 years and recovered our UBIT because they were like, hold on, wait, why? So we were able to get $75,000 back
That's
from
serious money.
IRS for the past 3 years, because you can go back and amend.
Right.
So it was worth, I think we paid him $5,000 or something
You
to
got
do
75
that.
back.
And got 75
Wow,
back.
that's
So
great.
it's worth, I know it's often scary because you're like, $5,000, like we have to pay you what? But it was worth it.
It's just like hiring an architect. You feel like, oh my gosh, do we really have to spend the money? But the payoff is down the road.
Yeah.
I think. I'm gonna guess bigger cities like Austin or Tulsa are gonna be more problematic and trickier. In a small city, you might be able to figure this out right away. Because people are, you know, things are less complicated. It's easier to get access to the right people in the government to get a straight answer. You might still want an attorney though, just to be there to advise you. You know, it might not cost $5,000, it might cost a few hundred. But I think that's generally good advice. Yeah. One other thing, I'm open to all questions, but just to touch a little bit more on historic designation. This is a question that often comes up. I want to dispel some myths. So the most common or the best known designation is the National Register of Historic Places, which is administered by the Park Service working with state offices. So every state has a preservation office. I think I brought that up before. It is strictly honorific. It will not constrain you. What it's meant to do is discourage the government from doing harm to any historic building. A classic example is widening a road, you know, which is often supported by federal funds, right? And you widen a road, you might impact a lot of historic buildings. So they do a study first to see what damage could be done, and they try to minimize that. So it's really meant to discourage the federal government from doing harm. It's not gonna constrain you. I highly recommend it. And you can go to your state preservation office and get a determination of eligibility. How's that for a fancy phrase? Determination of eligibility. Free. It's not gonna cost you anything. You just need to find the right, we can help you if you're not quite sure where to go, but find the right person who handles National Register nominations, and they can help determine if you're eligible. And if you're eligible, then you can decide if you want to get nominated. And the state can help you determine if that's worth your time and money, because it probably requires hiring a specialist. If you have somebody in your congregation that really knows the scene, they can maybe do a lot of the writing. I'm thinking of you folks in Austin. Is your building on there?
We are.
Yeah, we are.
We are.
We were just asking who did it. 'Cause
Yeah, we
didn't
know
do
it wasn't done until 1992, but it was built in 29, so
Well,
somebody had the foresight to
the
do
register
it.
didn't really start getting going until the 60s and 70s, so that's relatively early as far as the register goes. So finding a good person, if you're near Austin, maybe there's someone right here. We can maybe help you find someone. It will cost $3,000, $5,000, $8,000. That's a lot of money. It may sound like a lot of money, but again, it's a chance to tell your story because you can get in the paper. You can raise your profile. It helps buttress your argument that you're a special place. So that's one. Your states may have their own registers. That's usually less important. And then if you're in a bigger city, there will be local designation. Austin, I'm sure, has a local landmarks law. I don't know about Tulsa. Anybody know? Is there a local landmark law? Probably there is, because it's so famous for architecture. But larger cities tend to have them. If you're in the Northeast, where I live, a lot of smaller cities have designation too. So designation is to their local listing of landmark buildings. Yes?
I was gonna say, and our alum, Richard Mize, he had Trinity Presbyterian Church. He went through the process, get Trinity Presbyterian where he serves on the National Register. And Richard's a great person. If you need to contact him, get in touch with me and I'll have to get in touch with him.
That's good to know. Thank you. Now, it's a city, it's a local listing that can impose restrictions. But it varies all over the map, from New York City, which is very strict, to other cities where it's not very strict. So you just need to know your local law and talk to other churches or to sit down with the Historic Commission. It may be called the Landmarks Commission or the Historical Commission and find out how it works. They tend to want to be helpful to churches because they know you have a difficult job. So they don't want to make it harder for you. But on the other hand, their job is to encourage the preservation of historic buildings. So that is where the rub is. I'm not discouraging it at all because that's part of my world, designation. And for the citizens of Austin or the citizens of Tulsa or the citizens of whatever your city is, it's a good thing. They want their historic character to be preserved. But it may make it a little more difficult if you want to replace your slate roof with asphalt, or if you feel like you can't afford to keep up that original porch, and you want to take it down or whatever, then it's going to go before the Historical Commission. And they will have to review it, and they might say no. But that's a whole different world than the National Register. The National Register is very safe. And again, it costs a little bit of money, but it's worth thinking about. And also, we didn't discuss it today, but there are certain grants that require it. Like, I don't know these states as well, like I don't know about Oklahoma or Kansas or Missouri or whatever, but some states do provide preservation grants. And they often require that the building be on the National Register. Now, I don't know all your buildings that terribly well, but there is something called Save America's Treasures, which is a federal grant program. And these are very large grants. And it's very political, meaning you have to work with your senators. And I wasn't sure in the Trump era if it even survived, but it has survived. We call it SAT for short, Save America's Treasures. I think it started in maybe the Clinton era, maybe, or the Carter, it goes back. But they're big, big grants. But I think they only fund the creme de la creme of buildings. So the register is like the normal swath of historic buildings. But the very tippy top is called the National Historic Landmarks, NHLs. See, this is more than you wanted to know. But the NHLs are the very, very best. And often you have to be an NHL to qualify for SAT. How's that for Alphabet City? So
You don't know unless you ask.
So NHL is something, again, I don't know your buildings well enough. There may be a couple here that would qualify to be an NHL. To be honest, it's worth your while to sit down with your state or local historical agencies and just get acquainted with this world. Because designation and grants, and by the way, I'd recommend it anyway, because they might know of a grantor in town that's interested in historic buildings or improving the character and the livelihood or the life of your city. So if you have, like in Austin for sure, I don't know, have you ever sat down with the historical commission?
Yes.
Have you talked
And
about
we-
funding and?
Yes, we just applied for a grant.
Ah,
We applied for 3 different grants. 2 we ended up not qualifying for, but we did the eligibility form. I've taught myself how to write grants. It's been interesting. Another thing they don't teach you in seminary. I took a grant writing class, and then we did just apply for one that's up to $250,000 because we are in cohort with the arts. And so hopefully, we're waiting to hear back, but hopefully we do qualify for that one.
This month.
Great.
This month.
Yeah, I think the end of this month we should.
Great. So you can't answer this question because you are now the expert, you guys. But for everybody else, if you want to get a grant, what's the most important factor in getting a grant? This is another quiz. This could have been the quiz, we could call this the quiz hour. So what's the most important factor in getting a grant?
How to write one?
You know how to write one and you learned? No.
Understanding the grantor's
Priorities.
priorities.
Yes, and also if there's a fit between their priorities and what you're all about.
Yes.
And that is often quoted as the most important thing. You've got to be a fit. There's got to be alignment between what they care about and what you do, but that's not the most important thing. Thank you, though. That's number 2.
Okay.
Story.
Close.
Story.
Pardon?
Is it your story?
That's clearly important, and I don't want to negate what I've been saying all day long. But that's not the most important thing.
Two decimals.
Any other guesses?
Timing?
Well, yes, you need to know the timing of their grant cycle and understand, when they give. You want to know how much they can give. You want to know where they give. There's a lot of things you need to know about that funder, but none of those things are the most important.
That's number 3.
All right.
And by the way, don't worry, this question stumps pretty much everybody. The most important thing is developing a relationship.
Yeah.
And as church folks, you totally get that, right? Now, then that, by the way, you're getting a little hint at what our training's all about. So we just did this with our National Fund cohort. How do you develop a relationship with the foundation that's 2 hours away and has a staff that's typically overwhelmed? Foundation staffs are famous for being overwhelmed with too many proposals and too much to review. And, the chance of getting them to come and visit you is pretty much 0. So how do you get them to get to know you is a toughie. And so we talk about that. What are the different aspects of a foundation you could connect to? Staff. And by the way, a lot of foundations don't even have staff. If they're smaller, they don't have staff. Well, who else is in the orbit of a foundation besides staff? Or the trustees. So you want to get to know the trustees. And by the way, Candid is the organization that runs what used to be the Foundation Center Library. Most big libraries have a Candid section where you can get online, you can learn all this stuff about any given foundation. So it's free at a local library. So staff and board. But there's another possibility that's maybe easier than the other 2. Who else is in the world of foundations besides staff and board?
Donors.
Well, donors are probably also on the board, but they could have given the money a long time ago, so it might be their family or descendants. But who else? When I tell you, you're going to laugh.
Local politicians?
But grantees, the others who have gotten money,
On the ground.
others, we call them grantees. So they're the grantor, you're the potential grantee. Well, they're great because, you know, it could be another church. It could be a social service agency. It could be an arts agency. They have gone through the process and they got a grant. So they've come to know the staff, maybe a trustee. They've gone through the system. So what we do, so if you go to the Candid Library and look up some foundations, do some sorting, you may find some foundations and you're thinking, I don't know those people. I don't know how to get a hold of them. Whatever. Look at the grantees and you might see, oh, wait, I know that agency. We've worked with them. Call them, have lunch, and talk it through. And that may be the best way to get to know how to develop a relationship. Now, when I say relationship, it doesn't mean you're going to have a social lunch every month. It just means they need to get to know you. Right. And it might start with a phone conversation, but again, having that door opened. So say you have lunch with that other nonprofit, and they say, I'd love to help, and they might even offer to open the door, send an email. The first step might be a phone call. Second step might be an invitation to sit down. And ultimately, what's the ultimate thing you do want? When you're about to send a proposal, what would you really like from that person at the foundation? You want them to visit you. That's what you really want. But that's, of course, the most time consuming. So that's not too likely. So what if the foundation in there, so you go to Candid, you sit in the library, the library guy or the woman, she says, this is how you do it, here's how you do some sorting, and you look up foundations that are interested in religion, say. You could do religion, preservation, kids, whatever your, you know, who your audiences are. What if the foundation, right there it says, we do not accept unsolicited proposals. Basically, they invite you. That's it. Nothing more to discuss. What then?
Call them and tell them about yourself.
No, they're not going to take your call.
So you find who received a grant.
Exactly. It's the
Reach out to
same. It's the
them.
same thing. What that means is you're not going to go to staff. That's hopeless
Right.
because they have a list of the groups that they fund, and that's it. But if you go through another grantee, then maybe if you've got a really compelling program and story, maybe they will invite you. That's the only way to do it. There's no way around it. By the way, it's a completely, can I just say one thing? It's completely pointless to send out grant proposals cold. Don't ever do it. It's just a complete waste of your time. I mean, you might on a very rare occasion get a grant that way, but it's just not going to happen. When we were doing our training in Cincinnati years ago, we were talking about all this, and a rector from an Episcopal church stood up and she said, yeah, we researched a dozen foundations and they were a perfect fit. They funded exactly what we do. And we sent out a dozen proposals, and how many were funded? And then they chose one where they felt they could really get to know them. And that's what led to the big grant. So, you know, and churches don't want to hear this if they're doing grant work, you know, because they think, well, you know, we'll do our research, we'll send a proposal. It's just really a waste of your time. So, you know, sounds like you guys have learned what to do. So, but remember, you know, I mentioned the pie chart, which you have not seen yet, but if you do new dollars, you'll see it. Grants are only about 20% of the total. So, you know, we try to say it's not the magic bullet. It's a piece of the puzzle. It's 20%. The biggest parts, members, individuals who are not members, and then grants. It's the third biggest part of the pie. So, you know, you have to kind of keep everything in perspective. Other thoughts or other questions? I know we've kind of jumped around, sorry. Yeah.
A few years ago, I was working on a project in Oklahoma City trying to purchase a church to do a community service multi-use location. Do you assist groups like that are organized, have a good solid plan, or trying to reuse these sacred spaces in the way that you're describing, but as its own entity maybe? Have you ever thought about, or is that something that's ever been pursued before?
So we do fund church buildings that have changed hands. So that's what's happening. It was vacant and now you're trying to
Right.
Make it a mission site, right?
Right.
Yeah, a worship site too, or just mission?
Well, it would be the old worship space would have been used as community service space for Boy Scout, Girl Scout meetings, things like that. There could be worship space there. I mean, that would,
So
I guess, just have to be thought about.
that's the trick for us. So we only fund so when it comes to the national fund, we only fund purpose-built churches
Right.
where there's still a congregation.
Okay.
So like if it's a nonprofit, we get this question all the time. Or, like say it's a college chapel, no. If it's a nonprofit reusing a church building, well, that's commendable. But it's not, we're about healthy congregations.
Got it.
Now you're in kind of a gray area where it's not your main site,
Mhm.
but you're purchasing another historic church and bringing it back to life. That might fit.
Okay.
It's certainly very worthy. So if you're embarking on this and are wanting to invest, I would be inclined to support that myself. Be sure to get my card
Of
and be
course.
sure to be in touch.
Yeah.
Is this something you've purchased but have not yet?
No, I've been working on with another couple of people because I didn't have the ability to just go outright and purchase it. So I had looked into a partnership purchase kind of situation, but that doesn't always have to be the case.
Well, as long as your congregation is the owner,
Mhm.
or at least an owner,
Okay.
because that's what we require, that the building be owned by and used by the congregation. But in this case, it would be maybe more mission or outreach rather than worship. That may be okay.
Okay.
And certainly, we would want to encourage that.
Right.
I mean, absolutely. We don't want to see a vacant church be lost. So I commend you. That's great.
Thank you.
Does all this make sense? Do you all this seem like it's useful and appropriate given your situations? Do you have any questions where like I still don't understand something or?
What would be the best next steps if we feel like, yes, you would be a fit for our congregation? What you say contact you, like take your card, give you a call in a week or?
Talk about the National Fund in
Yeah.
particular?
Yeah.
And are you thinking you might want to apply soon,
Yes.
like in the next 6 weeks?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I would say reach out to me. I will connect you to the people who run the National Fund. Because you may have some questions. But so again, I think you've all written it down, fundforsacredplaces.org. Go there. There are a couple pages on eligibility. And you'll get a sense of what we're looking for. I would start there. And you may have questions. And you've gone through or you've looked at it before. It's also changed a bit. I think it's a little less onerous looking.
Oh.
I don't think it was ever that bad, but it's better than it was. So take a look, and that may raise questions, and then I might be able to answer the questions myself, or I might turn you over to Rachel Hildebrandt, who's the director of the fund. But I would do it soon, obviously, because we have so little time. And if you decide to proceed, and would like me to comment on your draft, I'll need a couple weeks. So we need to have the conversation by mid-February in order to give me a little time I don't do line editing, but I can say, hey, how about this? You missed this. Can you make this stronger? For any of you. So if any of you are thinking about this, just let me know. I have cards here, a couple more left. I'm happy to give you some input. And by the way, if you have colleagues, I'm sure you do have colleagues who are active at a Black church. There's a whole separate program run by the National Trust for Historic Preservation. That's also funded by the Lilly Endowment. So our program is Lilly Endowment funded, and that program is Lilly. That's particularly for African American churches. They operate a little differently, but they provide significant grants, not quite as large as ours, but they're important. And so that's another source. Also, are there some folks here from Texas beyond Austin? There is a program for rural Black churches run by Preservation Texas. So if you've got colleagues in your conference or district that who are Black pastors or Black churches, that you might let them know about that. can't remember who funded that, but that's for rural Black institutions, including churches. So you probably have learned a lot more than you wanted to learn, or you heard a lot more detail than you wanted to hear. But your questions are great, and we'd love to be helpful. I mean, that's one reason I came. And, you know, I've gotten to know Dr. Poe a little bit, and it's a pleasure to be asked. But I wanted, you know, we don't have a lot of time in this part of the country, so we wanted to get acquainted and share our story and be helpful. So if any of you are intrigued by any of this, you know, just follow up with an email.
When you talk about the training, is there a cost associated with the training?
There is. So we typically work with 8 or 10 churches over the course of a year. The total cost is $30,000. But what we tend to find that works is asking the denomination to come up with some of the money, and then the churches kick in a little bit of money. And so in some cases, the judicatory might have enough money to fund 80% of it, and each church kicks in a little bit. On occasion, we've worked with the denomination, so say it's a disciples project or it's a Methodist project. Sometimes we'll work with the judicatory to approach a local foundation to fund it. So we find that it helps for each church to have some skin in the game, even if it's just $500. But that doesn't cover the entirety of it. That might generate 5,000 and so typically, now the problem is judicatories have less money than they used to have. You know, we started New Dollars 15, 20 years ago, and it was fairly easy to find a Lutheran synod or an Episcopal diocese or a Methodist conference ready to kick in 30. But now, you know, they're all shrinking. So it's harder. It is harder. But I think it's worth it because each church will be positioned to be able to tell their story, to raise money, and to share space in new ways. I think I've often talked to church folks who said it was the best training they've ever done because it's very active and it's fun, but you're learning a lot and you come away really feeling prepared. So if you know of denominational leaders who might be intrigued by this, I'm happy to talk about it. We actually began our first, now there's something else you should know. We started our first national cohort. We never did it before, but with support from the Lilly Endowment, we started offering it nationally, meaning that any church anywhere, you don't really need your denomination to sponsor it, could apply. And it involves a couple of shorter Zoom sessions leading to one day in Philadelphia. And so we have to compress some of it. But we do have some time, all of us, to be together. And by the way, one of the great things about this training is we're learning from each other, not just from us, but learning from each other. There's kind of a community of churches. So if that intrigues you, be sure to let me know. And we'll be announcing this in the next couple of months. It will probably happen, the culminating day will be in the fall. And we just had a great group, mostly from the Midwest and the Northeast and the Upper South this last year. But if we can include this region, the one thing it does entail is a flight to Philly, so you have to deal with that. But it was a great experience. So I just remembered that. So that's something, you know, we can only have 8 or 10 churches nationally. But if anybody's intrigued, just let me know and we can be sure to inform, you know, keep you informed. So, well, thank you guys. Thank you.
Great. And before we go, we need to close with a hymn. The church is one foundation, Lily Endowment. All right, thank you so much, Bob. So now we're back to Pittman Hall for closing worship. You have a little bit of time to get over there. No need to rush. That closing worship actually starts right at 4. We want to make sure you had a break to get over there, and then after that, we'll have the dean's reception. That will be a good social time. So be sure to do that. So we'll see you all at 4 o'clock for worship.
What churches did you look at while you've been here? Did you go through some downtown?
Well, no, I was wandering around at 7 o'clock at night. So I walked past First Presbyterian and Boston Avenue Methodist